Hello, English 1302. This is Dr. Kramer, and this is a recorded lecture. Now, just a few notes before I get into my spiel here. First off, I am not a professional. Maybe someday I will create a YouTube empire and monetize my content, but that day is not here. The other thing is you may hear some noises. You already heard my little baby kitten, Florence Fightingale, who's here with me in the office so that she doesn't get eaten by my puppy who doesn't quite know that cats are friends yet. And so you may hear a little background noise from her. You might actually also hear her turning my printer on and off. Hopefully she won't make any copies. The other thing to note is that there is sometimes for my recordings, I have written out lecture notes. This is one of those, and so those will be available for you on the module if you would prefer to consume this lecture that way or read along that way. If you click on this video, it's embedded in the instruction page, but if you click on it and watch it on YouTube, you can get closed captioning. And the other thing is that I have provided a PDF of this PowerPoint as well. So that's just for you to know. All right, let's get started. Please excuse any background noise. Again, I am not a professional YouTuber. Okay, the other lecture assigned for this week covers the basics of argument and answers the following questions. What is rhetoric? What is American academic style? And what are Aristotle's appeals, also known as artistic proofs? If you're not familiar with these terms or you'd like a refresher, I recommend that you watch that lecture before this one. In this lecture, I'll talk about the ways to argue a point, the types of logical thinking, and some examples of illogical thinking, or fallacies. Aristotle, who lived in the 4th century BCE, had a lot of opinions about a lot of things. For instance, if you ever take a literature class from me and we study drama, we'll talk about his views on that subject. Along with the 3 appeals of argument, Aristotle saw 3 main issues in argument. I'll briefly touch on them here and then go into more detail in just a moment. We'll end this section of the lecture with a little skit. The 3 main issues in argument, according to Aristotle, are blame, whose fault is it? Values, is it right or wrong, helpful or not, etc., and choices, what should I do? Blame. Blame seems to be the default argument issue of our times. An example of a blame argument or a blame question would be the following. Is the Chinese government to blame for the coronavirus outbreak? The purpose, the kitten says yes, the purpose of this kind of argument, as evidenced by its name, is to allocate blame, to determine who is responsible for something. It is called forensic rhetoric, and this word is used as in forensic science or the NFL, not the National Football League, but the National Forensic League, which is a group for debaters. A blame argument or a forensic argument deals with the past. Let's go to values. Here's an example of a values question. Should college education be free? Notice how there is no judgment on people in the past who made you pay for college to blame someone or something for an evil in the world. Instead, a values argument seeks to separate the good from the bad. You can also use a values argument to look at other dichotomies, like ineffective, effective, or cost efficient, not cost efficient, worth the money, not worth the money, etc. The fancy name for a values argument is demonstrative rhetoric, in that you are demonstrating the good or bad. In terms of time, demonstrative rhetoric deals with the present. Choice. The final type of argument issues, according to Aristotle, is choice. An example of a choice argument is as follows. Should we make the campus more pedestrian friendly or build more parking lots? The purpose of a choice argument is to make a decision, and for this reason it is known as deliberative rhetoric. It deals with the future. Choice is by far the most powerful and pragmatic or practical way to argue. It deals with the advantageous. That is, what is going to work out best or have the best payoff? In your own everyday life, think about how many pointless blames or values arguments you get into. For instance, when my kids were younger, I would sometimes find that most of the cookies I'd just baked had mysteriously disappeared. How successful would I be with the following line of questioning? Who ate all the cookies? A blame argument. If my goal is to not have people eating cookies in secret and getting sick to their stomachs, then maybe I can make this into a choice argument and say something like this instead. Kids, we seem to have a cookie monster in this house. What's the best way to make sure that all the cookies don't disappear so suddenly? Do you see how I took in that example the emphasis off the blame, who is responsible for these cookies that just disappeared, to the future? How can we prevent this from happening again? I've included a small skit here. It's adapted from a book called Thank You for Arguing by Jay Heinrichs. Listen as the volunteer actors read the script and think about the following. How does Mark win the argument in the second vignette? How does the work you read for the reflection essay examine its issue? Does it use forensic, demonstrative, or deliberative rhetoric? Here's the first section of this skit. If you don't address the correct core issue in your arguments, you will never meet your goals. The setting for all these vignettes is a study room where two friends are studying and listening to music. Student 1, or Libby's, goal is to achieve quiet. This is a choice issue. Let's see how things go wrong when she focuses on the wrong issue in her argument. First, she will blame her friend Mark for the noise, and then the argument will devolve into a question of values.
Can you turn down the music a little bit?
You're the one who set the volume last.
See how Mark is blaming Libby? Let's see if they can get this discussion back on track.
Oh, really? Then who was it blasting Despacito all over the place this afternoon?
So that's what this is about? You hate my music.
Now this argument is really heading south. Not only have they begun a blame war, but Libby has insulted the values of Mark, at least regarding music. Let's try this again, arguing in the future tense and focusing on choice. See if the roommates or friends are able to agree on something, or if they both end up mad at each other.
Can you turn the music down a little bit?
Sure, I'd be happy to. But is the music too loud, or do you want me to play something else?
Well, now that you mention it, I might prefer something a little bit less pop.
Something more trap, you mean? That doesn't seem good. Want to watch Netflix?
By turning the argument back to choices, the roommates keep the argument from getting too personal. By proposing a TV show instead of music, Mark has now put Libby a little off balance, making her more vulnerable to persuasion.
What do you have in mind?
We never finished season 2 of Riverdale.
Riverdale? That show is getting too edgy for me.
This is a little off topic, but I want to add in that by proposing an extreme choice first, it will make the next choice you propose seem more reasonable.
Well then, how about Friends?
Sure, I was done studying anyways.
And just like that, Mark got what he wanted to begin with. He knows the other student would have preferred a different show, but Friends doesn't sound bad after the first choice. By moving the argument away from blame, whose fault is it the speaker volume was so loud, or values what kind of music is best, the roommates are now able to have fun together with no hurt feelings. Okay, moving on to the second part of this 3-part lecture, we're going to talk about types of thinking or logic. Let's now switch gears a bit from the overarching approach to argument, blames, values, choices, to the way you can develop an argument. We'll begin with inductive logic. Inductive logic is a means of reaching a belief based on facts and less debatable inferences. It moves from specific to general, like a court case where an attorney spends several days having witnesses lay out evidence, from a blood spatter expert to a soil specialist to eyewitnesses and so forth. In inductive logic, you look at the preponderance of evidence and then draw your conclusions, instead of going in with a preconceived notion and then looking for evidence to back up your claim. The best way to arrive at your thesis when you are writing is to travel inductively. We'll talk about this more thoroughly when we discuss thesis development. Another way to build an argument is by using deductive logic. Deductive logic is based on premises that the audience holds to be true. Did you do proofs in geometry class like I did, or has that gone by the wayside with new math? If you did proofs, you were developing a deductive argument based on the laws of geometry. You base your conclusions at the end on these premises, the laws of geometry, in this example. Deductive logic works also by way of syllogisms. A syllogism is a logical proof that contains a major premise, a minor premise, and a conclusion, but not a kitten. I'll show you a famous one in a moment. If I could write syllogisms like a math problem, they would look like this. All A is B, all C is A, therefore C is B. Major premise, a minor premise, and a conclusion. Here's a famous example. Major premise, all men are mortal, or all A is B. Minor premise, Socrates is a man, so C is A. Conclusion, Socrates is immortal, therefore C is B. Syllogisms are the basic building block of deductive reasoning. If we were using inductive reasoning, in this example here, we wouldn't begin with a premise, but we would instead make observations. We might have to wait for Socrates to die to determine whether he is mortal or not. Deductive reasoning is how you will lay out your argument when you write, after having determined your argument through inductive reasoning. It's important to note, though, that in order for the syllogism to work like this, the premises must be sound and accepted by all parties. Faulty premises make for faulty logic. A third way to develop an argument is by analogy, or a comparison of unlike things. Metaphors and similes, for example, are types of analogies. So an analogical argument is an argument based on comparison. It is not a rigidly logical argument, and likenesses should be between essential parts of the nature or purpose of the items or ideas being compared. At some point, of course, all analogies break down, but they can be very useful in helping your audience understand your reasoning. Beware the powers of analogies, however, and use them wisely. Some analogies become so overused that they don't mean much anymore. Take, for example, Godwin's law, developed by American attorney and author Mike Godwin in the earliest days of the internet, 1990. Godwin's law states that as online discussions grow longer, the probability of a Hitler analogy emerging approaches 1 or becomes more likely. In some news groups, for example, there is a rule that once the Hitler reference is made, the discussion is over and the person who used the Hitler reference has quote-unquote lost the discussion. Godwin himself writes as follows: although deliberately framed as if it were a law of nature or of mathematics, Godwin's law's purpose has always been rhetorical and pedagogical. I wanted folks who glibly compared someone else to Hitler to think a bit harder about the Holocaust. All this to say, please don't use a Hitler analogy in your writing for this class. I believe that references to Hitler are largely either made for shock value or the result of laziness. Carry your argument out with a different analogy or use deductive or inductive reasoning instead. Let's shift from the appropriate use of logic to how it is inappropriately used. Logical fallacies, in the words of your textbook So What, quote, reflect poor thinking, and being able to build fallacy-free arguments will demonstrate effective critical thinking and make you more credible in school and professional settings, close quote. And that's from pages 197 through 198, which is part of your assigned reading for this week. Logical fallacies fall into two broad categories: oversimplification and ignoring the issue. We'll look now at both these categories in greater depth and discuss some common examples from each category. So What Chapter 9 covers some of these examples, but not all of them. It also introduces some of its own. So first, the errors of oversimplification. These errors fall into the following subcategories. Overgeneralization or hasty generalization. This happens when you make a claim based on too little evidence. You can't claim that something is true if you only have an example or two as evidence. For instance, if I say to myself, Cameron didn't ask me out again, I'll never find true love, then I am falling into despair about my love life based on my experience with one potential romantic partner. Watch this one, people, as we like to tell ourselves overgeneralizations about ourselves all the time. Another error of oversimplification is the forced hypothesis. A forced hypothesis fails to consider other possible explanations for an occurrence. For example, say you're at your little brother Ruben's piano recital and everyone claps after he plays Tappy Tap Tap and Row 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 Your Boat on the piano. When Grandma says, everyone clapped so nicely after Ruben's performance, he is on his way to becoming a concert pianist, she is taking things a bit too far. She is failing to consider Ruben's age, level of experience, rules of decorum for piano recitals, and the fact that some people are clapping just because Ruben looks so cute in his little suit. So that is a forced hypothesis. A non sequitur fallacy makes a logical jump. Think back to our syllogism. The non sequitur will jump from claim A to claim C without stopping to prove claim B. The name in Latin means does not follow. Here's an example. Congress will surely approve the education bill since they already approved the infrastructure bill. This claim ignores the fact that infrastructure and education don't really have anything to do with each other in terms of funding, or that people often have a lot more strongly held opinions about education, or that Congress will have the backing of the Senate or the President in order to get the second bill passed. All these are assumptions that the speaker has made without proving them. Another error of oversimplification is the slippery slope. In a slippery slope argument, someone makes a claim that one step will lead to a chain reaction resulting in something very bad. They will make this claim based on little evidence. Here's an example. If you always come immediately to soothe your baby when she cries, she will grow up to be a spoiled brat and end up in rehab or in massive credit card debt. See how we take one little action and blow it up into a lifetime of bad adult behavior. The false dilemma or false dichotomy presents only two solutions to a problem when there are usually, in fact, at least a few other ways to solve a problem. It presents issues as black and white when there are usually shades of gray. Here's an example. Calling college must either raise tuition or face financial ruin. By the way, Collin College is doing just fine financially. I'm just using this as my example. This example does not take into account other ways to raise or save money besides raising tuition or ending up in financial ruin. A false analogy. This fallacy assumes that just because two things are alike in one respect, they must be alike in others. For example, we require people to have a license to go fishing. We should require a license to have children. There are really very few similarities between the act of fishing and rearing children. This analogy breaks down before it even gets started. Godwin's law, described earlier, usually operates as hyperbole, over-exaggeration, or as a false analogy. The final fallacy of oversimplification that I'd like to talk to you about is the post hoc fallacy. The full name of this fallacy is post hoc ergo propter hoc, which means after this, therefore because of this. In this fallacy, people assume that correlation means causation, that because something happened before another event, they must be causally related. For example, one month before I met my true love, I saw a shooting star and wished that I would find my soulmate. The legend is true. At their root, sports superstitions are all post hoc fallacies. Do you have a rally hat? Do you turn your team jersey inside out so that your team will win? Do you have lucky socks? You're participating in the post hoc fallacy. It's fun for entertainment and relatively harmless. Just don't make arguments with this fallacy. You can practice with these fallacies with the following Kahoot. This is also linked on Canvas for online sections in the Week 2 module. The second broad category of logical fallacies is the ignoring the issues fallacies. These tend to have more colorful names, so perhaps that will help you remember them. The first that I'd like to talk about is begging the question. This type of fallacy accepts as a premise as truth that may actually be in doubt. It begs the question, in other words, is this premise true or not? Assuming something is true that actually is under debate. Here's a classic begging the question type statement. People who deny the truth of Marxism are simply dancing to the tune of their capitalist masters, as Marx understood so well. The speaker in this case is assuming that you, the listener, take it for granted and accept Karl Marx's view of the world as factual. And this may not be a good assumption to make. Circular reasoning is just another name for begging the question. This is most obvious in statements that use repetitive wording. An example would be, the reason everyone wanted the Slap Me Silly Elmo doll this past Christmas is because it is popular. You see how the speaker is basically saying the toy is popular because it sold a lot of units? That's the circular reasoning. The red herring fallacy diverts attention from the main issue under discussion to a side issue that is only superficially related. It's a kind of bait and switch. You see politicians do this all the time. Arrgh! Here's an example. We can't improve the quality of teaching at Collin until we balance the budget. The speaker in this case definitely has an axe to grind regarding budgets. There are many ways to improve teaching quality without spending more money. This fallacy got its name supposedly from fox hunting. In order to make the sport fairer for the poor fox and to make the fox hunt last longer, dog handlers would drag smelly fish over the hunting course beforehand to make things more difficult for the dogs to find the fox. I have no idea if this story is true or not, but it leaves a vivid image in the mind of the speaker or writer, deliberately muddying up the argument to throw you off the scent of their position's weaknesses. Now, just a side note, you see red herrings all the time in mystery novels, and you learn to spot them or learn to suspect them. But part of the fun of reading a mystery novel or watching a mystery TV show or movie is figuring out what is a legitimate clue and what is a red herring. But please don't let them show up in your argument. Straw man. This is another common fallacy in political discourse. A straw man is basically an imaginary opponent. When people commit the straw man fallacy, they are ascribing views to their opponents that their opponents don't actually hold. For example, don't like the budget cuts your Republican colleague wants to make to fight frivolous spending and fraud in the Medicare system? Accuse her of wanting to kill off old people. Don't like the way your Democratic friend wants to subsidize college for everyone? Accuse him of being a communist. Here's another example. People who oppose this education reform want to go back to the days of the one-room schoolhouse. No one is actually arguing to go back to the days of the one-room schoolhouse. That is a straw man or a fake opponent. It's a lazy way to attack your opponent without addressing the true issues. Ad hominem. This Latin phrase means to the man and involves attacking someone's ethos or character. This is not a good way to argue if you want to keep your argument about issues and not about personal character. Tell that to people who get into it with each other on social media, attacking their least favorite politicians or celebrities. Here's a more toned down example. The people at the parking office are just freaks who want to give everyone a ticket. This is not attacking the parking policy, but instead devolving to name calling. The final ignoring the issues logical fallacy that I'd like to discuss with you today is bandwagon, also known as ad populum. The bandwagon appeal is commonly used in advertising and appeals to everyone's inner desire to be accepted by those around them. However, popularity of an idea does not equate with the soundness of an idea. Just look at all those random fashions from the past, like bottle cap necklaces, jelly bands, or most hairstyles from the 1980s. Here's another example. Everyone is doing the keto diet to lose weight, so that's what you should do too. Side note, I actually have done a keto diet and lost a lot of weight in the past, but it's not for people who have kidney issues, or young children, for example. There's another Kahoot linked on the Week 2 module for you to practice ignoring the issue fallacies. Please give it a try before the quiz if you want some extra practice. I also strongly advise watching this little clip from a witch trial from Monty Python's Holy Grail. I know that British comedy from the 1970s is not to everyone's taste, but you'll see a dizzying array of logical fallacies on display. due to copyright issues, I can't actually play it for you on my own YouTube video, but I have put the link here and I've put it in the lecture notes as well. You guys take care. Reach out if you have any concerns or questions, and I will talk to you next week.